2 years ago, my sister stole my fiancé. At our mother's funeral, she whispered, still alone at 33, Sophia? Pathetic. I have Ryan, the beach house, everything you'll never deserve. I smiled softly. Natalie, have you met my husband? I gestured across the room. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the marble floor. She knew exactly who he was. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're a subscriber, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. You know that feeling when you're standing in a room full of people, but you've never felt more alone in your entire life? That's exactly how I felt at Mom's funeral reception. The hall at Riverside Memorial was way too fancy for what Mom would have wanted. She would have hated this place, all sterile and cold with its marble floors and those massive windows overlooking the bay. Mom was a backyard potluck with folding chairs kind of woman, not a hotel conference room with catered appetizers person. But Dad insisted on something dignified, and honestly, none of us had the energy to fight him on it. I'd been standing by the memory table for about 10 minutes, just staring at photos of Mom's life. Baby pictures from Taiwan. Her nursing school graduation here in San Francisco. Wedding photos where she looked so impossibly young and happy. My Taiwanese mother who'd taken Dad's Mexican surname when they married 42 years ago. The most recent one showed her in her garden last spring, hands covered in dirt, wearing that peaceful smile she always had when she was messing with her roses. My black dress was simple. Nothing fancy. Just a knee-length thing from Nordstrom that Mom actually helped me pick out 2 years ago for some work conference. Classic never goes out of style, she'd said in that mix of English and Mandarin she always used with me. I'd thought about that this morning while getting dressed, and her voice was so clear in my head it physically hurt. Sophia. I didn't even need to turn around. I knew that voice. My younger sister Natalie had this particular way of saying my name, like she was disappointed just by having to acknowledge my existence. She slid up beside me, and I swear to God, she looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover. Her black dress screamed designer, probably Dolce & Gabbana, knowing her. Her hair fell in those perfect waves that look effortless but definitely took 2 hours with a professional stylist. Those diamond studs in her ears? At least 2 carats each. And her makeup was absolutely flawless, not a single tear streak despite all the crying she'd been doing for Dad's business friends. It's a beautiful service, she said quietly, just loud enough for me to hear but not the people around us. Mom would have been so proud of how we've all turned out. Well, most of us anyway. I kept staring at the photos. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of looking at her. This was classic Natalie, she'd find your weakest moment and go straight for the throat. She'd been doing it our entire lives. When I made honor roll, she made sure everyone knew her SAT scores were higher. When I got my first serious boyfriend in college, she somehow became his friend and convinced him I was too focused on my career. And 2 years ago, she pulled off the ultimate betrayal. I mean, look at you, she continued, playing with that Cartier bracelet on her wrist. 33 years old. Standing here completely alone. No husband. No ring. No one to hold your hand during the hardest day of your life. It's actually kind of heartbreaking, Sophia. Each word felt like a slap. I could feel people starting to pay attention to us. Aunt Margaret glanced over from across the room, looking worried. Mr. Patterson, one of Dad's old colleagues, actually paused his conversation to look our way. Ryan and I were talking about it in the car, Natalie said, nodding toward the guest book where my ex-fiancé stood looking like he'd walked out of a Ralph Lauren ad. About how sad it is that you never really moved on from us. From us. Like their betrayal was some shared trauma we all experienced together, instead of something she deliberately planned and executed while I was picking out wedding invitations. He feels terrible about it, you know, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Guilty, even. But what could he do? He fell in love with someone else. These things happen, right? She paused, making sure her words landed. The heart wants what it wants. And his heart obviously wanted someone more sophisticated. More woman. More woman. There it was. The knife, twisted just right. The message was clear: I wasn't enough for him. I have the beach house in Malibu now, she continued, her voice getting that braggy quality she couldn't quite hide. Right on the water. Ryan surprised me with it for our second anniversary. We spent last month in Bali, first class, obviously. He's opening 2 new developments in Orange County, and we're talking about starting a family soon. Every word was designed to highlight what I didn't have. What she'd taken from me. And you, she said, tilting her head like she was examining something sad and broken, you have what? That little apartment in Portland? That job at the architecture firm? I mean, it's honest work, I guess. But don't you want more, Sophia? Don't you ever wonder what your life would have looked like if you'd been enough for him? The question hung there between us like a challenge. Did I want what she had? The cheating fiancé? The marriage built on lies? The constant need to prove her worth through designer labels and vacation photos? Look at us, she said, gesturing between her designer outfit and my simple dress. Look at where our lives ended up. I'm living my absolute best life, and you're, what? Just existing? Surviving? The words cut deep because they touched on my biggest fear, that maybe I had been just surviving instead of actually living. But hey, she said, her voice taking on this patronizing tone that made my skin crawl, I'm sure you'll find someone eventually. Maybe not someone like Ryan, obviously. But someone who doesn't mind that you're a little damaged. Damaged. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I should go check on Ryan, she said, starting to turn away. He gets emotional at funerals. All that sensitivity is what made me fall for him in the first place. She paused, like she'd just remembered something. Oh, and Sophia? You might want to think about therapy. I know someone who specializes in helping women who can't let go of the past. She could probably help you finally move on and find some peace. She was about to walk away, probably feeling victorious, when something inside me just shifted. Maybe it was the 2 years of therapy I'd already done. Maybe it was the work I'd put into rebuilding myself from scratch. Or maybe it was just knowing that I'd survived her worst and come out stronger on the other side. I thought about the man who'd kissed me goodbye this morning. The one who'd held me while I cried about Mom. The one who'd shown me what real love actually looked like, not that desperate, anxious attachment I'd mistaken for love with Ryan, but something real and solid and safe. Actually, Natalie, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. There's something you should know. She turned back, eyebrows raised, probably expecting me to break down or beg for details about her perfect life. I'm not alone, I said, stepping aside as I saw him making his way through the crowd of mourners. I haven't been alone for a long time. The color literally drained from Natalie's face. Like, I watched it happen in real time. Her foundation couldn't hide how pale she went. Those diamond earrings actually trembled as her hands started shaking. Because she recognized him instantly. They both did. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. The memory hit me like a wave as I watched recognition dawn on Natalie's face. Suddenly I was 29 again, standing in the lobby of the Fairmont Hotel in San Jose during the annual Tech Innovation Gala. I'd almost skipped the event that night. My firm had bought a table, and honestly, networking events exhausted me. But my boss at Cruz and Associates Architecture had basically insisted, saying I needed to put myself out there more if I wanted to make partner before 35. That's where I met Ryan Blackwell. He was standing near the silent auction tables, studying a wine country weekend package like it was the most important decision of his life. He wore this perfectly tailored navy suit, and he had this confidence about him, not arrogant, just assured. Like he knew exactly who he was and where he was going. My friend Jessica from grad school introduced us. Sophia's the brilliant architect behind that sustainable housing project everyone's been talking about, she'd said. The one that won the Civic Design Award? Ryan's handshake was firm. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His smile genuine. "I've been following that project," he said, and the way he said it made me believe he actually meant it. "The way you integrated green spaces into affordable housing? That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking the real estate industry needs." We talked for almost an hour. About sustainable development, the housing crisis in the Bay Area, the balance between profit and social responsibility. He actually listened to me. Like, really listened. Asked thoughtful questions. Didn't interrupt or mansplain my own field back to me. When he asked for my card, I felt like I was floating. Our first date was at this little Italian place in North Beach. He showed up with a single white peony, my favorite flower, which he'd somehow remembered from our conversation about my mom's garden. It felt thoughtful without being over the top. We stayed until the restaurant staff started stacking chairs around us, completely lost in conversation about everything: travel dreams, family stories, the books that shaped us. When he kissed me goodnight outside my apartment, his lips soft and tentative, I felt like I was living in one of those rom-coms I secretly loved. My parents adored him immediately. Dad bonded with him over golf and real estate market trends. They'd disappear onto the back patio during family dinners, talking about investment strategies and development opportunities. I'd find them there, Dad's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before Mom's first cancer scare. "That boy's going places," Dad would say, beaming. "And he clearly adores you. The way he looks at you, like you're the only person in the room." Even Mom, who was usually suspicious of anyone dating her daughters, approved. "He has kind eyes," she'd told me in Mandarin while we were doing dishes after Sunday dinner. "And he helps clear the table without being asked. That tells you about a man's character." Natalie's reaction had seemed genuine at first. She gushed about how perfect we looked together, how lucky I was, how excited she was to potentially have Ryan as a brother-in-law. But looking back now, there was something off about her enthusiasm. Her compliments came too quickly. Her smile was too practiced. Her hugs lasted just a beat too long, like she was studying him instead of welcoming him. "God, he's gorgeous," she'd whispered to me after that first family barbecue, her fingers lingering on my arm. "Those eyes, that smile, that whole confident thing he has going on. You better hold on to him tight, sis. Men like that have options." I'd laughed at the time. Now it felt more like a threat than a warning. The engagement came 10 months later during a weekend trip to Napa. Ryan had planned everything perfectly: sunset dinner at a Michelin-starred restaurant, a private table on the terrace overlooking the vineyards, the ring hidden in a dessert that arrived with, "Will you marry me?" written in chocolate on the plate. I said yes before he even finished his nervous speech about wanting to build a life with me. The ring was stunning, a classic emerald-cut diamond in a platinum setting. Not the biggest stone I'd ever seen, but elegant. Timeless. "I wanted something that matched you," Ryan had explained. Classic, sophisticated, enduring. Wedding planning consumed the next 8 months. I threw myself into every detail: venue tours, dress fittings, cake tastings, flower arrangements. It felt like the most important project I'd ever taken on. And when Natalie offered to help, I was genuinely grateful. She had great taste, and she wasn't working at the time. She'd recently quit her marketing job, saying she needed time to figure out her passion. "Let me handle the vendor meetings," she'd insisted. "You're slammed at work, and I actually love this stuff. We need everything to be perfect for your big day." Her dedication seemed so touching back then. If only I'd known what she was actually planning. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. I just didn't want to see them. It started small. Ryan began working later, missing dinners we'd planned, showing up at my apartment around 10 or 11 with apologies about difficult clients and project deadlines. "Sorry, babe," he'd say, giving me a distracted kiss on the forehead. "The Newport Beach development is killing me. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I worked 60-hour weeks myself, pushing to make partner at Cruz and Associates. So I understood. I didn't question it. Then there was the perfume. At first, it was just a hint of something floral clinging to his dress shirts when I picked them up from the dry cleaner. Not my scent. I'd always worn simple fragrances, clean and understated. This was different. More sophisticated. Jasmine and something darker, more sensual. Almost familiar, though I couldn't place it. Must be from a client meeting, Ryan explained when I mentioned it. You know how some women go overboard with perfume in professional settings. That made sense. He met with clients all the time, wealthy women looking to invest in luxury condos, real estate agents who wore too much everything. It was a reasonable explanation. But the scent kept appearing. On his car seats. On his jacket after late meetings. Once, I even smelled it on his pillow when I stayed over at his condo. Each time, he had an explanation. A female colleague who'd ridden in his car. A client dinner at a restaurant where the hostess had been heavily perfumed. A hotel conference room that hadn't been properly aired out between events. On its own, each explanation made sense. Together, they started forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Natalie was everywhere. She'd dropped by Ryan's office with coffee and pastries, claiming she was in the neighborhood after meeting with the florist. She started texting him directly about wedding details instead of going through me. I didn't want to bother you during work hours, she'd say. Your sister is amazing, Ryan would tell me after these encounters. So organized. So thoughtful. You're really lucky to have someone who cares this much about your wedding. Natalie knew details about our centerpieces that I hadn't approved. She had opinions about our menu that somehow carried more weight than mine. She talked about our vision like she was the bride instead of the helpful sister. One night, about 6 weeks before the wedding, I came home to find them on my couch together, laughing over wedding seating charts and what looked like her third glass of wine. Oh, Soph. Natalie had jumped up, slightly flushed. We were just finalizing the table arrangements. Ryan had some great ideas about mixing his work friends with our family. I didn't know you were coming over, I said to Ryan, trying to keep my voice light. Natalie texted that you were working late and needed help with some last-minute decisions, he said. Didn't want you to stress about it. It was thoughtful. It made sense. But finding them together in my apartment, in my space, made my stomach twist. The phone calls became more frequent too. Ryan's phone would buzz during our time together, texts and calls he'd answer with quick, whispered conversations in the hallway or bathroom. Crisis at the office, he'd explain. You know how it is. But once, I saw the caller ID before he snatched the phone away. Natalie. At 10:47 p.m. On a Tuesday. Wedding emergency, he'd said quickly. The caterer has questions about dietary restrictions. At 10:47 p.m. On a Tuesday? I'd let it go. I didn't want to be that girlfriend, paranoid, jealous, insecure. Ryan loved me. Natalie was my sister. They were both just trying to help make our wedding perfect. The breaking point should have come earlier, but I was so deep in denial I couldn't see what was right in front of me. 5 weeks before the wedding, I found a receipt in Ryan's car. Le Bernardine in San Francisco. $247. Date night, I thought at first. Then I looked at the date. Last Thursday. The night he'd said he was working late on the Orange County project. The night I'd eaten leftover pad thai alone in my apartment. When I asked him about it, he didn't even hesitate. Client dinner. Last-minute thing with the investors from Singapore. At Le Bernardine? That's pretty romantic for a business meeting. They requested it. You know how it is with international clients, they want the full San Francisco experience. I wanted to believe him so badly that I chose to. Even though something deep in my gut was screaming that nothing about this was right. Even though that perfume I kept smelling? I'd finally placed it. It was Natalie's signature scent. The one she'd worn since college. The one that was all over my fiancé. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in April, 3 weeks before my wedding. I'd left work early with a migraine that felt like someone was driving a nail through my left eye. My boss had taken one look at me and told me to go home before I scared the clients. I'd been working 80-hour weeks trying to finish the Waterfront Commons project before the wedding, and my body was finally staging a rebellion. On the drive home, I passed Ryan's office building in downtown San Jose and had a sudden thought. Maybe I could surprise him with dinner from that Thai place he loved. He'd mentioned working late on the Newport proposal, and I figured he could use the food and company. Also, if I'm being completely honest, some part of me wanted to prove my paranoia wrong. Wanted to walk in and find him exactly where he said he'd be, doing exactly what he said he'd be doing. Wanted to feel stupid for all those suspicions that had been eating at me for months. I parked in the visitor lot and grabbed the takeout bags, my head still pounding but my spirits lifting slightly. This would be nice. Unexpected. Romantic, even. The elevator ride to the 7th floor felt longer than usual. The building was mostly empty at 8:30 p.m., just a few workaholics burning the midnight oil. The hallway was dimly lit, and I could see a strip of light under Ryan's office door at the end of the corridor. Voices drifted out as I got closer. His familiar baritone and another voice that made my blood run cold. I stopped about 10 feet from the door, the takeout bags suddenly feeling like they weighed 1,000 pounds. "We can't keep doing this," Ryan was saying, his voice heavy with emotion I'd never heard from him before. "The wedding is in 3 weeks. Sophia's going to find out. Not if we're careful." Natalie's voice. Unmistakable. "After the wedding, we can figure out how to." I didn't think. Didn't plan. My hand just pushed the door open. The takeout bags hit the floor with a crash that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Red curry and pad CEW splattered across the expensive carpet, but I barely registered the mess. They were on his leather couch. The one I'd helped him pick out from West Elm. Her black dress was unbuttoned halfway down. His shirt was completely gone. 10 months of dating. 8 months of engagement. Almost 2 years of believing I'd found my person. All of it shattered in the space between one heartbeat and the next. They sprang apart like teenagers caught by parents. Natalie's face was flushed, and for a split second, I saw something in her expression that looked almost like relief. Like she was glad to finally be caught. "Sophia," Ryan started, reaching for his shirt with shaking hands. "This isn't, we didn't mean for." But I was already backing toward the door. My engagement ring came off before I even realized what I was doing. 2 years of wearing it, and suddenly it felt like it was burning my skin. The ring hit his desk with a tiny crystalline sound that somehow seemed louder than my shattering heart. "Soph, wait," Natalie called out, and the nickname, the one only she used, the one from when we were kids sharing secrets and dreams, felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. I ran. Down the hallway, my heels clicking against the tile. Into the elevator, jabbing the lobby button repeatedly like that would make it close faster. Through the parking lot to my car, where I sat gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. Not yet. I was too shocked for tears. My brain couldn't process what I'd just seen. It kept trying to rewrite the scene, to find some other explanation that made sense. Maybe they were just talking and their clothes spontaneously fell off. Maybe it was some weird wedding surprise that looked really bad out of context. Maybe I was having a stress-induced hallucination from my migraine. But no. I knew what I'd seen. What I'd heard. We can't keep doing this. Keep doing. As in, multiple times. As in, this wasn't a one-time mistake or a moment of weakness. This was ongoing. Deliberate. Planned. My phone started buzzing. Ryan's name flashed across the screen. Then Natalie's. Then Ryan's again. I turned it off. I drove home on autopilot, barely remembering the route. When I got to my apartment, I looked around at all the wedding planning materials scattered across my dining table, seating charts, vendor contracts, the custom napkins with our initials that had just arrived yesterday. Ryan and Sophia. April 28th, forever starts today. That's when I finally started crying. And once I started, I couldn't stop. I couldn't stay there. Every corner of that city held memories that now felt contaminated. The coffee shop where Ryan and I had our first date. The park where we'd gone running on Sunday mornings. The farmer's market where we'd planned to buy flowers for the wedding. Even my own apartment felt wrong. He had a key, his clothes were in my closet, his toothbrush sat next to mine in the bathroom. Portland seemed far enough away. Random enough. A city where I didn't know anyone and no one knew me. I found an apartment on Craigslist at 3 a.m, a tiny studio in southeast Portland that the landlord was willing to rent without a credit check if I paid 3 months up front. It wiped out most of my savings, but I didn't care. I just needed somewhere to disappear. Everything I owned fit into my Honda Civic. 3 suitcases of clothes. A box of books. My laptop. Some kitchen stuff I grabbed randomly from cabinets. I left behind the wedding dress hanging in my closet, the engagement photos on my walls, the future I'd been building for 2 years. The drive up I-5 took about 10 hours. I stopped once for gas and terrible coffee somewhere near Reading. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my fingers went numb, but I couldn't seem to loosen them. Like if I relaxed for even a second, I'd fall completely apart. The apartment was worse than the photos suggested. Maybe 400 square feet, and that was being generous. The carpet was stained with God knows what from previous tenants. The bathroom was barely large enough to turn around in. The kitchenette consisted of a mini fridge, a 2-burner stove, and about 2 feet of counter space. One window looked out onto a brick wall. It was perfect. Anonymous. Exactly what someone trying to disappear needed. I spent my first week in Portland eating cereal for every meal because I couldn't summon the energy to grocery shop properly. I'd stand in front of the dairy case at Safeway and just freeze. Too many choices. Too many decisions. Which milk? Why did it matter? Nothing mattered. I cried at the weirdest times. In line at the post office. During a tampon commercial. When I saw a couple holding hands while crossing the street. Once, I had a complete breakdown in the frozen food aisle because I reached for my phone to text Ryan about what to have for dinner before remembering that I couldn't do that anymore. The worst part? I had to tell work something. I couldn't just vanish. I sent an email to my boss at 2 a.m. on my 4th day in Portland. It was way more honest than professional. I need to resign effective immediately due to personal circumstances. I apologize for the lack of notice. I won't be able to complete the Waterfront Commons project. Burned that bridge completely. But I couldn't face going back. Couldn't face the questions, the pitying looks, the inevitable gossip when people found out my sister had slept with my fiancé. My savings evaporated terrifyingly fast. Rent, utilities, groceries, gas. Turns out living is expensive when you don't have a job. I'd been making good money as an architect, enough to have a comfortable cushion saved up. But watching that number decrease every time I checked my bank account felt like drowning in slow motion. I applied to 73 jobs in 3 weeks. Everything from architecture firms to coffee shops to retail stores. Every application required me to explain the gap in employment, to craft careful lies about seeking new opportunities, instead of admitting I'd fled my life after catching my sister with my fiancé. Rejection after rejection. We've decided to move forward with other candidates. Your qualifications are impressive, but we're looking for someone with more recent experience. Thank you for your interest, but this position has been filled. Finally, after 5 weeks of increasingly desperate applications, I got a call from a small residential architecture firm called Verde Design Studio. They needed a junior architect, basically someone to do all the grunt work senior architects didn't want to do. The pay was about 60% of what I'd been making in San Jose. No benefits. No prestige. No path to partnership. I took it immediately. My first day, I arrived 30 minutes early and sat in my car in the parking lot, giving myself a pep talk that sounded more like threats. You can do this, Sophia. You can draft floor plans. You can attend client meetings. You can act like a normal human being for 8 hours. You can pretend you're not completely broken inside. The office was in a converted warehouse in the Pearl District. Exposed brick, industrial lighting, that particular smell of coffee and printer ink that all creative offices seem to have. There were maybe 15 people total, architects, designers, an office manager, a couple of interns. My desk was tucked in a corner near the supply closet. Ancient computer, a drafting table that wobbled, a chair that squeaked every time I moved. It was the best I could manage. And barely that. Grace Kim found me crying in the bathroom on my 3rd week at Verde Design Studio. I'd managed to hold it together pretty well up until that point. Got to work on time. Did my assignments. Kept my head down. But that particular Tuesday, a client had requested changes to a residential design that required me to reconfigure the master bedroom layout, and something about drawing that space, the his and hers closets, the romantic bathroom with the soaking tub, just broke something inside me. I'd excused myself, locked myself in a stall, and tried to cry quietly. Apparently, I wasn't quiet enough. Hey. Grace's voice came from the other side of the stall door. I'm going to take a wild guess and say you're having a rough day. I tried to pull myself together, wiping my face with toilet paper that was too thin to be effective. I'm fine. Just allergies. And I'm the Queen of England. She paused. I'm Grace, by the way. Senior architect. I've seen you around but haven't had a chance to introduce myself properly. Want to grab coffee after work? There's a place around the corner that has terrible coffee but excellent emotional support potential. The way she said it, no pity, no excessive concern, just straightforward acknowledgement that I was clearly not okay, made me open the stall door. Grace was maybe 45, with short black hair streaked with silver and wearing chunky glasses that somehow looked both professional and artistic. She handed me actual tissues from her purse. I don't really drink coffee anymore, I admitted, my voice still shaky. Neither do I. But sometimes sitting in a cafe and pretending you might order something is exactly the kind of normal you need. We ended up at a dive bar called the Starlight instead, nursing ginger alesh and sharing a basket of fries that were way too salty. Grace told me about her divorce 7 years ago, her 2 teenage kids who were currently driving her insane, and her journey from successful architect to someone who'd had to completely rebuild her career and life from scratch. I was 40 when it all fell apart, she said, stealing a fry from my side of the basket. Thought my life was over. Turned out it was just getting started. The second version of me is way better than the first. How long did it take? I asked. To feel better? Honestly? Longer than I wanted. But you know what helped? Therapy. Good therapy. Not the kind where someone just nods and asks how that makes you feel. She pulled out her phone and texted me a contact. Dr. Rebecca Walsh. She's expensive, but she has a sliding scale for people who are rebuilding. She basically saved my life. Or at least saved me from becoming a bitter wine mom who makes her kids' lives miserable. I looked at the contact info on my phone. I don't know if I can afford. Call her. Tell her Grace sent you. Tell her you'll pay what you can. She's more interested in helping people than making money, which is probably why her office is in a slightly sketchy part of town. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in Dr. Rebecca Walsh's office in a converted house near Hawthorne. The space was nothing like I'd expected, warm and cluttered with books, plants everywhere, mismatched furniture that looked like it came from estate sales. Her desk was covered in coffee mugs and random paperwork, and she had this shock of red hair going silver that she kept pushing out of her face. Grace says you're drowning, she said in this straightforward way, like we were discussing the weather. So let's start there. Tell me about the water. I expected her to ask about Ryan, about the betrayal, about the wedding that never happened. Instead, we spent the first 3 sessions talking about who I'd been before any of it. The Sophia who'd graduated top of her architecture class. The daughter who'd organized elaborate birthday parties for her parents. The friend who'd driven 6 hours to help someone move. Trauma has this way of making us forget our own strength, Dr. Walsh said during one session, her Irish accent making every word sound important. You survived something that would have destroyed a lot of people. That's not weakness. That's resilience you didn't even know you had. Slowly, painfully slowly, I started remembering that I was more than just someone who'd been betrayed. I was someone who'd built things. Created beautiful spaces. Solved complex problems. Made people's dream homes come to life on paper and then in reality. I started showing up differently at work. Not just surviving the day, but actually engaging. Contributing ideas in meetings. Staying late because I was interested in a project, not because I was avoiding my empty apartment. Grace noticed. You're coming back to life, she observed one day over lunch. It's good to see. I'm trying, I said. That's all any of us can do. She invited me to her book club, a group of women who met monthly to drink wine and discuss novels they'd mostly skimmed. I went reluctantly, expecting to hate it. Instead, I found myself laughing for the first time in months at someone's ridiculous theory about a mystery novel's ending. Engaging in a debate about whether a character's motivations made sense. Actually caring about something outside of my own pain. On the drive home that night, it hit me that I'd gone 3 entire hours without thinking about Ryan or Natalie once. It felt like a miracle. Grace decided I was ready to start dating again about 6 months after I'd started therapy. I very much disagreed with her assessment. You need to get back out there, she said over lunch at our usual sandwich place. Not because you need a man, but because you need to remember that not everyone is Ryan. I'm perfectly happy being single, I protested. You're perfectly comfortable being alone. There's a difference. She pointed her pickle spear at me. My neighbor's brother is visiting from Seattle. Software engineer. Divorced, no kids. Seems relatively normal. Coffee. 1 hour. What's the worst that could happen? Famous last words. David turned out to be a perfectly nice guy who spent our entire coffee date explaining his extensive collection of vintage video game cartridges. For 90 minutes straight. I learned more about the market value of sealed Nintendo 64 games than I ever wanted to know. So yeah, if you ever want to invest in retro gaming, I can definitely give you some tips, he said enthusiastically as I made up an excuse about a work emergency. I texted Grace from my car, I will never forgive you for this. She replied, okay, so that one was a miss. But you survived. That's progress. Date number 2 came from an app Grace forced me to download. His name was Marcus, and his profile said he was a financial advisor who loved hiking and trying new restaurants. He seemed promising in his messages, funny, articulate, asked good questions. In person? He showed up 25 minutes late, ordered the most expensive thing on the menu plus 3 cocktails, then spent the entire dinner explaining my own job to me. See, what you don't understand about architecture is that it's really about the client's vision, he said, gesturing with his fork. You're just there to execute what they already know they want. I have a master's degree in architecture, I said flatly. Right, but in practice, he kept going, apparently not noticing my expression. When the check came, he looked at it and then at me expectantly. We're splitting this, right? I believe in equality. I paid for my salad and single glass of wine, $32. His portion was over $150. I deleted the dating app before I even got to my car. Maybe I'm just meant to be single, I told Dr. Walsh during our next session. Maybe some people are designed for solitude. Or maybe, she replied with that knowing look I'd learned to both appreciate and fear, you're just not meeting the right people in the right circumstances. Sometimes the best connections happen when we're not actively searching for them. When we're just living. The third attempt was the worst. Another setup, this time from someone at work. His name was Brandon, he was in commercial real estate, and he seemed genuinely interesting during our initial text conversations. The date started okay. We met at a wine bar in the Pearl District, got a bottle to share, and the conversation flowed naturally. He was charming, attentive, asked about my work with what seemed like genuine interest. Then, about an hour in, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his whole demeanor changed. "I should take this," he said, stepping away from the table. I heard him talking in the corner. "No, I told you I'm working late. Because it's important. Just deal with it yourself for once." When he came back, he was flustered. "Sorry. My girlfriend," he stopped, realizing what he'd just said. "I mean, my ex-girlfriend. We're basically broken up." "It's complicated." "Complicated," I repeated, my stomach dropping. "We're in the process of separating. Emotionally, we've been done for months. We're just figuring out the logistics." I was already standing up, grabbing my purse. "I can't do this." "Wait, Sophia. I can't be the other woman again." The words came out sharper than I intended, loud enough that nearby tables turned to look. "I won't." I left him sitting there and walked the 45 minutes back to my apartment because I couldn't stand the thought of being trapped in a rideshare with a stranger. That night, I sat on my apartment floor with a pint of ice cream, crying not because I was heartbroken over any of these men, but because I was terrified that I was too damaged to ever trust anyone again. "I think I'm broken," I told Dr. Walsh at our next session. "Like, fundamentally broken. Every time I try to move forward, I just can't." She leaned forward in her chair, her expression serious. "You're not broken, Sophia. You're protecting yourself. There's a difference. Your instincts are actually working perfectly. You're recognizing red flags and removing yourself from unhealthy situations. That's growth, not damage. Then why does it feel so hopeless? Because you're trying to force something that needs to happen naturally. You're ready to heal, but you're not ready to settle. That's actually healthy." She paused. "Stop looking for someone. Just focus on building a life you love. The right person will show up when you're not trying so hard to find them." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But sitting in my small apartment that night, watching other people's lives through my window, couples walking dogs, friends laughing on their way to dinner, the world moving forward while I felt stuck, I wasn't sure I had the energy to keep trying. Maybe this was just who I was now. Someone who'd been betrayed and never quite figured out how to be whole again. Dr. Julian Torres walked into my life on a rainy Thursday morning in October, carrying a rolled-up set of blueprints and wearing a dark green Henley that made his brown eyes look almost gold. I'd been at Verde Design Studio for about 18 months by then. Long enough to stop feeling like an imposter. Long enough to have my own small projects instead of just grunt work. Long enough that Grace trusted me to handle client meetings without supervision. "Sophia, you got a walk-in," our receptionist called across the office. "Dr. Torres for the medical clinic project." I looked up from my drafting table, confused. "I thought that wasn't starting until next month." "He's early. Says he wanted to meet the architect before committing." "Great." I was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt because I'd thought I'd be in the back drafting all day. My hair was in a messy bun, and I was pretty sure I had pencil smudges on my face from rubbing my eyes. But when I walked out to the reception area, Dr. Torres didn't seem to notice or care about my casual appearance. He stood up immediately, extending his hand with a warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Dr. Julian Torres," he said. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. "I know I'm early for our official timeline, but I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. Hope that's okay." "Sophia Cruz," I replied. "And it's fine. Would you like to talk in the conference room? Actually, could I see where you work? I like to understand the creative process." That was different. Most clients wanted the polished conference room presentation, not the behind-the-scenes chaos of an actual design studio. I led him back to my drafting table in the corner. He took in everything, my sketches pinned to the wall, the coffee cups I forgot to throw away, the small succulent Grace had given me that I'd somehow managed not to kill. "You work in the corner," he observed. "Quieter?" "Something like that." I like having the walls. I pulled up a stool for him. So, tell me about your vision for the clinic. Most clients at this point launched into long speeches about their revolutionary ideas. Julian pulled out a worn notebook instead. I run a free clinic in Southeast Portland, he explained. Primarily serving uninsured patients, immigrant families, people who fall through the healthcare system's cracks. Our current space is. He paused, searching for the right word. Depressing. Fluorescent lights, institutional green walls, plastic chairs from 1987. My patients deserve better. He flipped open his notebook, and I saw pages of careful observations. How the waiting room lighting made patients anxious. How the lack of private spaces made people uncomfortable discussing symptoms. How parents needed somewhere safe for kids to play while they waited. I don't need fancy, he continued. I need functional and dignified. A space that says, you matter, instead of, you're charity. I found myself leaning forward, genuinely interested. What's your budget? Honestly? Tiny. We're grant-funded and donations. I've been saving for 3 years just to afford this renovation. He met my eyes directly. I can't pay what you're worth. But if you're interested in the project anyway, I can promise it'll be meaningful work. His straightforward honesty, no sales pitch, no manipulation, just the truth, made me smile for the first time that day. Let me see the space, I said. This afternoon, if you're free. I want to understand what we're working with before I commit to anything. His whole face lit up. Really? I mean, yes. Absolutely. I can pick you up at 1. The clinic was in a converted house near 82nd Avenue, surrounded by taco trucks and small ethnic markets. Inside, exactly as Julian described, depressing, institutional, designed by someone who'd never thought about what it felt like to be a patient. But I could see the potential. High ceilings that could bring in natural light. Good bones under the terrible cosmetic choices. Space that could be transformed into something warm and welcoming. Julian walked me through every room, introducing me to staff members and a few patients. Everyone clearly loved him. The way the receptionist smiled when he asked about her daughter's soccer game. How a nervous-looking mother relaxed when he knelt down to talk to her toddler in Spanish. The elderly patient who grabbed his hand and called him Mijo. You really care about these people, I said as we finished the tour. They're my community, he said simply. Some of them are my parents' friends from church. Some are former patients who became friends. All of them deserve healthcare that doesn't make them feel less than. We grabbed coffee afterward at a Vietnamese cafe next door. Not because it was a date, it wasn't, but because we were both caffeinated and the conversation just kept flowing. He asked about my background, my education, what drew me to architecture. I gave him the edited version. Grew up in the Bay Area, went to Berkeley for undergrad and grad school, moved to Portland for a fresh start. Fresh start from what? He asked, then immediately backtracked. Sorry, that's too personal for a first meeting. Bad breakup, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Needed to start over somewhere new. He nodded like he understood. I did something similar 5 years ago. Left a private practice in the Bay Area to come here and open the clinic. Everyone thought I was crazy to give up that kind of money and prestige. He shrugged. Best decision I ever made. The way he said it, not bitter about what he'd left behind, just, at peace with his choice. So, he said as we walked back toward my office. What do you think? Want to take on a broke clinic owner as a client? I should have said no. I should have explained that Verde Design Studio didn't typically take projects this small or with such limited budgets. But his genuine passion, his clear love for his community, made me want to say yes. Let me talk to my boss, I said. But I think we can work something out. His smile could have lit up the entire block. Julian and I worked together for 4 months on the clinic project. 4 months of site visits, design revisions, budget negotiations, and increasingly frequent coffee meetings that had nothing to do with the actual work. Somewhere along the way, without me quite noticing, he become my favorite part of the week. He was different from anyone I'd dated before. He listened more than he talked. He remembered small details, that I preferred tea over coffee in the afternoons, that I got anxious before client presentations, that I was allergic to lavender. He never pressured me to share more than I was ready to share about my past. And he was funny in this quiet, unexpected way. Dry observations about bureaucratic red tape. Self-deprecating stories about medical school disasters. The kind of humor that made you think before you laughed. When the clinic project officially wrapped in February, I felt genuinely sad that our regular meetings would end. We should celebrate, Julian said as we did the final walkthrough of the completed space. Natural light poured through the new skylights. The waiting room felt warm and welcoming with its soft colors and comfortable seating. The kids' area had turned out exactly as I'd envisioned. Dinner? Not work-related. Just dinner. My heart did this little flip that I hadn't felt in years. Like a date? If you want it to be. He looked nervous for the first time since I'd met him. I'd been wanting to ask for months, but I didn't want to make things weird while we were working together. Yes, I said before my anxious brain could construct reasons to say no. I'd like that. Our first real date was at a small Ethiopian restaurant in northeast Portland. Julian arrived exactly on time, wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that made him look unfairly handsome. No flowers, but he'd brought a book, a collection of essays about architecture and social justice. I saw this and thought of you, he explained, looking slightly embarrassed. After hearing you talk about design equity for the clinic, I thought you might like it. It was possibly the most thoughtful gift anyone had ever given me. We talked for 3 hours. About our families, our paths to our careers, the moments that had shaped who we'd become. He told me about growing up in San Diego, the son of Mexican immigrants who'd worked impossibly hard to send him to medical school. About choosing family medicine over more lucrative specialties because he wanted to serve communities like the one he came from. I told him more than I'd planned to. About my mom's garden and her impossible standards. About Natalie and our complicated relationship. About moving to Portland to escape something painful, though I still didn't go into details about what. Whatever you ran from, he said as we walked back to my car, I'm glad you ended up here. We went on 6 more dates over the next month. Coffee dates. A hike at Forest Park. A concert at the Crystal Ballroom. Each one felt easy and natural, like spending time with someone who already knew me. On our 7th date, over Thai food at my favorite restaurant, Julian poured himself a second glass of wine and said, there's something I should probably tell you about my past. My stomach clenched automatically. Those words never led anywhere good. I used to work in the Bay Area, he continued. At a private concierge medical practice in San Francisco. Very wealthy clients, very high-end. Celebrities, tech executives, real estate developers. He paused. One of my former clients. I think you might know him. Ryan Blackwell? The wine glass slipped from my fingers. Didn't fall, but came close. Julian reached across immediately, steadying both the glass and my trembling hand. How do you? I couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't make the connection until last week, he said gently. I was reviewing some old files for tax purposes and saw his name. Then I remembered you mentioned growing up in the Bay Area, and I put it together. He squeezed my hand. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But suddenly, I did want to talk about it. The whole story came pouring out, meeting Ryan at the gala, the engagement, Natalie's betrayal, finding them together in his office, fleeing to Portland with my life packed into a Honda Civic. Julian listened without interrupting. When I finally finished, my face wet with tears I hadn't known I was crying, he handed me his napkin. That man is an idiot, he said simply. And your sister sounds like someone who's going to spend her life chasing something she'll never catch. You knew him? I asked. What was he like? Julian was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Arrogant. Entitled. The kind of guy who thought expensive healthcare made him important. He came to me once demanding antibiotics for what was clearly a viral infection. When I explained that wouldn't work, he threatened to report me to the medical board for refusing treatment. He shook his head. I dropped him as a patient after that. Life's too short to deal with people who treat service providers like servants. Hearing Julian's perspective, seeing Ryan through someone else's eyes as petty and small rather than the successful, charismatic man I'd built up in my memory, shifted something inside me. Is this going to be weird now? I asked. Knowing that connection? Only if you want it to be. He met my eyes directly. I'm interested in you, Sophia. Not your past. Not your ex. You. We kept dating. Slowly, carefully, building something that felt completely different from what I'd had with Ryan. This wasn't the desperate, anxious attachment I'd mistaken for love before. This was steady. Safe. Real. 6 months later, when Julian asked me to move in with him, I said yes without hesitation. A year after that, when he proposed in his clinic's community garden, the one I designed as part of the renovation, I said yes again, laughing and crying at the same time. We got married quietly at the courthouse with Grace and Julian's sister as witnesses. No big wedding. No drama. Just us, choosing each other. And I was happier than I'd ever been in my life. Now, standing at my mother's funeral with Natalie's champagne glass shattered on the marble floor, I watched that same realization dawn on her face. She knew who Julian was. More importantly, she knew what he represented. Julian crossed the reception hall with that quiet confidence I'd fallen in love with, weaving through clusters of mourners until he reached my side. He slipped his arm around my waist, a gesture of both support and solidarity. Julian Torres, he said, extending his free hand to Natalie with perfect professional courtesy. I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I certainly know who you are. Natalie's hand trembled as she accepted his handshake. Her usual predatory confidence had evaporated completely. The woman who'd spent the last 10 minutes systematically destroying my self-worth suddenly looked like she'd forgotten how to speak. Ryan had gone completely rigid near the guest book. His tan looked fake under the harsh reception lighting, and I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. Torres, Ryan said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an edge that sounded almost like fear. I didn't expect to see you here. Family connections, Julian replied smoothly, his arm tightening slightly around my waist. Sophia's mother was a remarkable woman. Though I suppose you knew that, having been engaged to her daughter once upon a time. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward to the mourners within earshot. I could see heads turning, whispered conversations pausing. Aunt Margaret had moved closer, no longer even pretending not to eavesdrop. Mr. Patterson was watching our group with the sharp attention of someone who recognized the early stages of significant drama. Engaged, Natalie repeated, her voice cracking slightly. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. You never mentioned you were married. You never said anything about. There's a lot I never mentioned, I said quietly, surprised by how calm I sounded. Turns out I didn't owe you updates on my life after you destroyed it. 2 years this past September, Julian added, his thumb tracing a gentle circle on my hip. Sophia's brought more joy to my life than I thought possible. She's brilliant, compassionate, talented, everything I didn't know I was looking for. The declaration was simple but devastating in its sincerity. Where Ryan had always talked about our relationship in terms of what I could do for him, boost his image, support his career, provide the right kind of companionship, Julian spoke about what I'd given him simply by existing. But how did you, Natalie started, then stopped, apparently realizing that any question she asked would only dig her deeper into whatever hole she was discovering beneath her feet. How did we meet? I supplied helpfully. Julian was a client at my architecture firm in Portland. We worked together on a community clinic project. Such a successful collaboration. Really established Verde Design Studio as a leader in healthcare architecture. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to highlight not just Julian's professional success and genuine mission, but also my own competence and independence. The woman standing here wasn't the broken, abandoned creature Natalie had expected to find. Mr. Patterson had moved closer now, his interest clearly piqued. "Torres," he said, stepping into our circle. "Aren't you the doctor who runs that innovative free clinic model? I read about your work in the Tribune. Quite impressive." Julian nodded modestly. "We've been fortunate to receive some good press for the community health initiative." "Community health?" Ryan repeated, and I caught something dismissive in his tone. Something that reminded me exactly why Julian had dropped him as a patient. "Is that what we're calling charity work now?" "I call it serving people who deserve healthcare," Julian replied, his voice remaining perfectly level. "Though I understand that concept might be foreign to someone who's only interested in clients who can afford concierge medicine rates." The subtle dig landed perfectly. Several people nearby shifted uncomfortably, and I saw recognition flicker across a few faces, people who clearly remembered Ryan's reputation for prioritizing profit over people. "You know each other," Natalie said, her voice barely above a whisper. She was putting pieces together, and I could see the exact moment she realized how badly this reflected on both her and Ryan. "You knew him before." "I had the misfortune of treating Mr. Blackwell briefly in San Francisco," Julian said. "Before I relocated to Portland to focus on more meaningful work." Small world, isn't it? The implication was clear. Julian had known Ryan, found him lacking, and moved on to something better. Just like I had. Ryan's face had gone red. "You dropped me as a patient because I questioned your competence." "I dropped you because you were abusive to my staff and demanded treatments that would have been medically inappropriate," Julian corrected, his voice still calm but carrying steel underneath. "I don't tolerate people who treat healthcare workers like servants." The reception hall had gone noticeably quieter. Our little drama had attracted a full audience now. I could see Dad's business associates watching with interest, family friends leaning in to catch every word, distant relatives pulling out phones to text others about what they were witnessing. Natalie looked like she wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow her. Her carefully constructed image, the successful sister, the one who'd won the prize, the woman who had everything, was crumbling in real time. "You planned this," Ryan said suddenly, his voice loud enough to carry across the room. "This whole thing. Meeting Sophia, marrying her, it's all some elaborate revenge scheme because I fired you as my doctor." The accusation was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality, that I actually laughed. The sound came out before I could stop it, bright and genuine in the heavy atmosphere of grief and tension. "Revenge?" I repeated, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "You think I married Julian to get back at you?" The idea was so ridiculous that even some of the eavesdropping mourners looked skeptical. "That would require me to still care about you enough to plan revenge," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "It would require me to think about you at all." It hit me as I said it. For the first time in 2 years, Ryan had become completely irrelevant to my life. Not someone I hated or resented, just someone who didn't matter anymore. Julian squeezed my hand gently, a small gesture of approval and support. Natalie was staring at us, her expression cycling through shock, confusion, and finally something that looked suspiciously like panic as she watched everything she'd said to me earlier completely backfire. The knock on our apartment door came 5 days after we'd returned to Portland from the funeral. Julian was in the kitchen making dinner, his specialty, chicken mole that filled our small space with the rich smell of chocolate and chilies. I was curled up on the couch sorting through sympathy cards, trying to decide which ones deserved handwritten responses and which could get away with a text. The funeral felt like it had happened months ago instead of less than a week. Surreal in the way traumatic events become once you're removed from their immediate aftermath. I wasn't expecting anyone. Grace knew better than to drop by unannounced, and Julian's sister was in San Diego visiting family. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize the woman standing in our hallway. Natalie looked diminished. That's the only word for it. Gone were the designer clothes, the perfect styling, the armor of expensive accessories. She wore jeans, actual regular jeans, not the kind that cost more than rent, and a plain gray sweater that had clearly been washed too many times. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face was completely bare. No makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes or the puffiness that spoke of recent crying. Her hands, those perfectly manicured hands that had once displayed her massive wedding ring like a trophy, were naked except for a simple gold band that looked somehow sad without its usual accompanying diamonds. "Sophia," she said, so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "Can we talk?" I stood in the doorway for a long moment, every instinct screaming at me to close the door. To protect the peace Julian and I had built from the chaos she represented. To keep her toxic presence away from the life I'd worked so hard to create. But there was something about the way she looked, stripped of all pretense, genuinely vulnerable for maybe the first time in her adult life, that made me step aside. "Julian's here," I said, leading her toward the living room. "That's okay. I mean, if that's okay with you." She followed me hesitantly, like she wasn't sure she had permission to exist in my space. Julian emerged from the kitchen, wooden spoon still in hand, and took in the scene with immediate understanding. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me," he said quietly, squeezing my shoulder as he passed. Natalie and I sat across from each other at the coffee table, the one Julian and I had found at an estate sale and refinished together. She looked around our apartment, taking in the modest furniture, the plants I'd somehow managed to keep alive, the photographs from our courthouse wedding. "Your place is nice," she said, and it didn't sound condescending. It sounded wistful. "It feels like people actually live here. Like a home." "It is home," I said simply. She was quiet for a moment, her hands wrapped around the mug of tea I'd made her more out of habit than hospitality. When she finally spoke, the words came out in a rush. "Everything's falling apart, Sophia. The house is mortgaged to the point where we're basically underwater. The cars are leased with payments we can barely make. My jewelry, most of it is financed through some high-end jeweler who's threatening legal action. Ryan's been living beyond our means for years, and I didn't even know until the calls started coming." The confession poured out of her. Collection agencies calling constantly. Lawyers sending threatening letters. Credit card debt in the hundreds of thousands. Ryan had been juggling loans and lines of credit to maintain their lifestyle, and now the whole house of cards was collapsing. "He controls everything," she continued, her voice cracking. "Every account, every credit card, every investment. I don't even know how deep the debt actually goes because he won't tell me. Just keeps saying he's handling it while the calls keep coming." I listened without interrupting, watching my sister, this woman who'd once seemed invincible in her cruelty, fall completely apart. "But the worst part," she said, looking directly at me for the first time, "is that I think he resents me for it. For the debt, for the pressure, for not being worth all the trouble he went through to." She couldn't finish the sentence. "To steal you from me," I finished for her. She flinched like I'd slapped her. "Yeah. And now that the transaction is proving too costly, he's having buyer's remorse." The funeral was the first time he'd looked at me with anything other than irritation in months, she admitted. And even then, it was only because people were watching. The moment we got in the car afterward, he started screaming at me. About how I'd humiliated him. About Julian. About how my family had always been beneath his standards. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. "Why didn't you ever fight back, Sophia? Why didn't you try to destroy me the way I destroyed you? Why didn't you tell everyone what I did? Why didn't you ruin my wedding, or expose the affair, or make my life hell?" The questions hung between us in the quiet apartment. I could hear Julian moving around in the kitchen, giving us privacy but staying close in case I needed him. "Because I didn't have to," I said finally, the words coming from some deep well of understanding I hadn't known existed. "Time did it for me." It was true. While I'd been rebuilding myself in Portland, learning to be whole again, time had been working its own quiet justice. The relationship built on betrayal had rotted from within, exactly like a building constructed on a weak foundation. You could paint over the cracks and patch the walls, but eventually the fundamental flaws would bring the whole thing down. "You really did move on," Natalie said, looking around at our simple apartment, at the life Julian and I had built. "You actually built something real." "Yes," I said. I did. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. I found something while cleaning out Mom's things. I thought you should have it. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small journal, Mom's daily planner, the one she'd kept faithfully for decades. Natalie opened it to a page marked with a faded receipt and slid it across the table. The entry was dated 8 months before Mom died, written in her distinctive handwriting that mixed Chinese characters with English words. Called Sophia today. Her voice sounds different, lighter, happier. Like when she was little and would sing while helping in the garden. She's found her way back to herself. My girls were best friends once. Drawing together, sharing secrets, protecting each other from the world. Natalie has forgotten that version of herself, but maybe someday she'll remember. Maybe someday they'll both find their way back to each other. I hope I live to see it. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Mom had seen through everything, my careful cheerfulness during our phone calls, Natalie's hollow victory, the fundamental sadness that had colored our family since the betrayal. But she'd also seen hope. Possibility. The chance for something better than what we'd become. She never stopped believing we could fix this, Natalie whispered. Even after everything I did. Everything I destroyed. She still thought. She couldn't finish. We sat in silence, Mom's journal open between us like a bridge across 2 years of pain. After Natalie left, I sat alone with Mom's journal for a long time, reading her words over and over until I could recite them from memory. Julian found me there 20 minutes later, still holding the small leather-bound book like it was something precious and fragile. "How are you feeling?" he asked, settling onto the couch beside me and pulling me into his arms. "Sad," I said honestly. "But also, free. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He kissed the top of my head. "Want to talk about it?" I told him everything, Natalie's confession about the debt, the crumbling marriage, Ryan's resentment. The desperate question about why I'd never fought back. Mom's journal entry that had somehow predicted all of this. She asked me why I didn't destroy her, I said, leaning into Julian's warmth. And the truth is, I didn't need to. She destroyed herself by choosing a life built on lies. Julian was quiet for a moment, his fingers running through my hair in that soothing way he had. "Do you feel vindicated? Satisfied that karma caught up with them?" I considered the question seriously. Did I feel vindicated? Triumphant? Like justice had finally been served? "No," I said, surprised by my own answer. "I just feel sad for who she could have been. And grateful for who I became instead." It was true. Looking around our small apartment, the mismatched furniture we'd collected from estate sales and thrift stores, the plants thriving on our windowsill, the photographs from our quiet courthouse wedding, I wouldn't trade any of this for the life Natalie had tried to build. She had the beach house, the luxury cars, the designer wardrobe. All of it financed by debt and held together with lies. A beautiful facade with nothing solid underneath. I had this. A 400 square foot apartment in Portland. A job I found meaningful. A husband who saw me as a partner, not a trophy. Friendships I'd built slowly and carefully. A life that was authentically mine. You know what's strange? I said, sitting up to look at Julian. 2 years ago, I thought she'd ruined my life. Destroyed everything I'd built. Taken everything that mattered. And now? Now I see that she didn't ruin my life. She shattered it completely. I paused, finding the right words. But she also gave me the chance to build something better from the pieces. Something that was actually mine instead of something I thought I was supposed to want. Julian's expression was soft, understanding. "You think you would have left him eventually anyway?" "Maybe. Probably." I thought about the woman I'd been at 29, ambitious, accomplished, but also anxious and people-pleasing. Constantly trying to be what everyone else needed. I was so focused on doing everything right. The perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfect wedding. I never stopped to ask if any of it actually made me happy. "And this makes you happy?" Julian gestured around our modest space. This makes me happy, I confirmed. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. Because I chose it. Because I built it myself after I figured out who I actually was instead of who I thought I should be. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only comes from being with someone who doesn't need you to fill every quiet moment with words. What are you going to do about Natalie? Julian finally asked. I don't know, I admitted. I don't think I can forgive her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I also don't need to hate her anymore. She's just someone who made terrible choices and now has to live with the consequences. That seems healthy. Dr. Walsh would be proud. I smiled slightly. 2 years of therapy finally paying off. Julian pulled me closer, and I let myself sink into the comfort of his presence. This man who'd walked into my life when I wasn't looking for anyone. Who'd seen me at my most broken and never tried to fix me, just supported me while I fixed myself. Who'd shown me what real partnership looked like, not the desperate attachment I'd mistaken for love with Ryan, but something steady and safe and genuine. I think I need to call my dad, I said after a while. He deserves to know about Natalie's situation. And maybe. I paused, considering. Maybe I need to tell him I'm okay. That I'm more than okay. Want me to stay while you call? Please. I picked up my phone and dialed. Dad answered on the second ring, his voice heavy with the grief that still colored everything. He said. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Dad. Actually, I'm better than okay. I looked at Julian, at our home, at the life we'd built together. I know the funeral was hard. Seeing Natalie and Ryan was hard. But I want you to know something important. What's that? I'm happy. Really, genuinely happy. Not in spite of what happened 2 years ago, but maybe because of it. Because it forced me to figure out who I actually was and what I actually wanted. There was a long pause on the other end. When Dad spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. Your mother knew that, you know. She told me during her last few weeks. Said you'd found your way back to yourself. That you'd become the strongest version of the daughter she'd always known you could be. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind that came from finally understanding something important. I wish she could have met Julian properly, I said. She would have loved him. She knew about him, Dad said softly. You mentioned him in phone calls. She said he sounded like someone who saw you clearly. That was important to her, that you found someone who saw you for who you really were. After we hung up, I sat with Julian in the gathering darkness of our living room, neither of us bothering to turn on lights. You know what the best part is? I said eventually. What's that? When Natalie asked if I'd met my husband at the funeral, and she recognized you, it wasn't because I'd planned some elaborate revenge. It wasn't because I'd orchestrated anything. It was just life. The universe providing its own kind of justice. Cosmic karma, Julian agreed. Exactly. I didn't have to destroy her. I just had to live well. Build something real. Choose authentically. I turned to look at him in the dim light. Choose you. Best choice you ever made, he said with that dry humor I loved. Second best, I corrected. The best choice was choosing myself first. He kissed me then, soft and sure, and I felt the last piece of the past finally settle into place. Not forgotten, not erased, but integrated into who I'd become. Natalie would figure out her own path forward. Or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility to save her or destroy her. I had my own life to live. And for the first time in 2 years, I was living it exactly the way I wanted to. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.